sees a figure standing next to him, and on review of the footage from his full spectrum night vision cam, he has captured the face of whoever it was beside him. It is only seen for a split second as the camera pans the room.
The idea of ghosts and the concept of them have been around for centuries, stemming from certain beliefs and religious practices. As well as this ideology of the afterlife, spectres themselves have infested our culture and society within our innumerable stories about them. These tales were commonly tossed around at campfires and by the hearth in the dying embers of day, but have considerably taken a new level in terms of presentation with the ever-evolving landscape of media and literature outlets. Thousands of novels and collection books have been printed and published over the years, bringing them from the mouths of tellers to easy-to-access books of shades and sinister wraiths. Adapting many of the previously published paginated stories as well as creating many new ones are the vast realms of television and film versions of them. Most of the time when you are looking for a screen telling of one, you will likely find a fully acted and performed piece, and whereas these are the most common in this field, they aren't the only ones. Several are straight up emulations of how the chronicles were, occasionally having acted inserts, but for the most part are built around an actor reading a story to the camera or a filmed audience. All of this brings me along neatly to a further collection of 12 adaptations of James's stories. In 1980, the crew behind the BBC children's series Jackanory devised and created Spine Chillers, which featured horror and ghost stories aimed at older children. The format was 10-minute episodes with different actors presenting and reading a version of a story to the audience, broadcasted over late 1980. Out of an overall run of 20 episodes, 3 were stories by M.R. James. Presented by Michael Bryant, these were The Mezzotint, A School Story, and The Diary of Mr. Pointer. Following this, a similar miniseries in 1986 titled Classic Ghost Stories was made and produced. This had 5 14-minute episodes hosted and told by Robert Powell. Unlike the Spine Chiller equivalents, the installments consisted of shots of the reading spliced with filmed sequences that accompany and fit into the narrative. Once again, The Mezzotint was adapted, which was followed by The Ash Tree, Wailing Well, Oh Whistle and I Will Come to You, My Lad, and The Rose Garden. All 8 of these productions were gathered together on disc by the BFI whenever they were releasing A Ghost Story for Christmas on DVD. Although I wouldn't personally say that the installments present are amazing, it still provided to be a good companion piece to those live action short films. As I've mentioned, I mainly have enjoyed the stories of M.R. James through adaptations on television. Because of this, the release here is even more interesting, as Wailing Well, The Rose Garden, A School Story, and The Diary of Mr. Pointer are some of the more lesser known stories by the author, with these being the only television adaptations of these particular stories. It's also engrossing for me to watch these and to see what differences there are between them and the more robust films by Lawrence Gordon Clark. One of the better Robert Powell episodes is The Ash Tree, which had a really creepy detail in this iteration where people are hearing screams from the tree that I don't think was in the 1975 film. Despite there being no inserts for Oh Whistle and I Will Come to You, My Lad for whatever reason, the ones for the other entries of classic ghost stories were really good, particularly for the Mezzotint. The engravings designed by Barry Wilkinson for use in this are fantastic and really creepy, which helped to add to the events of the piece greatly. In 2000, another similar series was created, This consisted of 4 30-minute installments, but with Christopher Lee in the seat of the author this time. The Stalls of Barchester, The Ash Tree, Number 13, and another version of Whistle screened over the Christmas of this year. 3 of these episodes were released on their representative discs as bonus features within the BFI's main range. The Ash Tree, however, did not get this treatment because of apparent copyright issues with a certain piece of music used. Whether this will be rectified with a future Blu-ray volume is yet to be seen. Jumping 20 years forward, the BBC ended up releasing a 5 CD box set entitled the M.R. James Radio Collection, which is a pretty extensive look at the adaptations of the author's work that have occurred through this way. The first and second disc of the set are 2 5-episode series of compact dramatic adaptations that are presented and linked by an actor narrating as the author. The first of these has Mark Gatiss in the role and Derek Jacobi as it in the latter. The former is entitled The Ghost Stories of M.R. James, with the latter also having the name Spinechillers, which has seen a standalone release in the past. Disc 3 starts with a trio of readings from the late 1990s by Benjamin Whitrow, and ends with a full cast adaptation of Martin's Close that was transmitted in 1963 originally. Disc 4 starts with a dramatisation of Count Magnus and is paired with The Haunting of M.R. James, which I believe is a docudrama starring Mark Gatiss once again. The writer and director of this other piece starring Mark are the same ones that worked on his series that appeared at the start of the box set. Great Lives of M.R. James from 2002 and The Ghosts of M.R. James from 1977 are 2 documentaries that compose the 5th disc and close the box set. Casting the Runes is a story that has had numerous audio tellings and readings in the past, with one so happening to be the second part of the 2018 series in the box set. Whenever I was discussing the ITV Playhouse adaptation from 1979 in my previous video, I mentioned how I read the original story and drew up what I consider to be 6 major events from it. Quite impressively, this 15-minute audio portrayal manages to adapt all of them into the proceedings. When I was listening to it, I did have thoughts creeping in occasionally as to if this was the correct way to tell the story, as due to the fast pacing of this version, it made me feel that it could have been 30 minutes longer and allow all of it to breathe better. However, in saying that, I will still say that it does manage to be a really good and creepy listen. The way that the ending with the church sequence is done is brilliant, with the sound design being pretty phenomenal, as is the rest of this series in that department. Casting the Runes isn't the only well-known adventure to feature within this mini collection, as it opens with another version of the mezzo tint. The third is a telling of the Stalls of Barchester Cathedral, which is then followed by a warning to the curious. Rats, which ends the quintet, is definitely the least known of them all, not to mention that it is the only one out of the 5 to not have had a full cast television adaptation. Because of my background in terms of exploring the stories of M.R. James, this provided an interesting context and helped me to visualise these tellings in my head. Now, it may be an unfair comparison with how vastly different these versions are, but it definitely does crop up quite often in my feelings for this particular series. These 15-minute slices can only do so much with the material they have to adapt, and in the case of the Stalls of Barchester Cathedral, whereas it is very good in its own right, for me personally there is a huge preference of depth to the Lawrence Gordon Clark film. The mezzo tint to me is about equal in quality to that of the 2021 version. However, there are some nice differences, such as the showing of the cause of the haunting and our main characters actually visiting the building depicted in the engraving. The warning to the curious for me is easily the best of the lot and is pretty incredible. The scene of Paxton digging the tunnel to find the crown is given some excellent treatment with the sound effects, which showcases a voice behind him that is described as sounding like of a great age and with sick lungs. This moment to me was much creepier than the film version personally, not to mention the ending with the beach scene and the deception is pretty terrifying. Honestly tempted to give this one a 10 out of 10. Probably another one that's about on level with the TV film. Rats for me is the odd one out, probably as I don't have a television version to connect it with, and is my least favourite of the quintet. Still a good auditory venture, well made and produced, not to mention that I found the scarecrow scene to be pretty chilling. It just simply didn't pop out for me as much as the others did. Whenever Powerhouse Films released the movie version of Casting the Runes on Blu-ray, it included another 2 audio versions of the story. In the mid-1980s, actor of Professor Parkins in Whistle 68, Michael Hordern, created a collection of 14 readings of ghost stories by James, which were released on cassette tape. The version of Runes from this is the first of these 2. To note, having listened to an upload of it on YouTube, it is just a straight up reading of the story and not an audiobook with music or sound effects. For the second, a 30-minute radio version was produced in 1947 as a part of the American series Escape. Also during the 1980s, the BBC produced a 50-minute version retitled as The Hex. Along with these 3, you can also find versions of the story by the channels Boxtail Soup, Edward French, Sherlock Holmes, Magpie Audio, and the Black Dog Chronicles on YouTube. Professor Harrington is seen at the start, begging and pleading with Julian Carswell to undo the spell that they have apparently done. It is no use, however, as the Professor is destroyed later that night. Arriving from America, a Dr. John Holden attends a British convention in which Harrington was scheduled to expose the satanic cult that the magician was a part of. Meeting with this deceased person's niece, Joanna, they venture to the residence of Carswell after he promises John a one-of-a-kind book thanks to a chance meeting in a library. The great skepticism that our main character has is pushed after hearing and seeing what the wizard can do at a show put on by them. What powers does Julian have, and what does 2 weeks allowed mean? Charles Bennett was an English screenwriter and director that had quite a studded career in the film industry. For example, they are known for working with the legendary Alfred Hitchcock in the 1930s, with them having written The 39 Steps and Young and Innocent. By the 1950s, he owned the rights to the story Casting the Runes and wrote a screenplay titled The Haunted. The script ended up being sold to Hal E. Chester and was subjected to bits of modification. This buyer ended up bringing in Jackie Turner, a genre director, with them having previously delved into the realms of horror, like the Criterion Collection released Cat People, upon the recommendation of the producer of Turner's previous film. The 2 clashed on set, but ended up working together to create the film. A 96-minute pre-release version was created, which was then followed by an 82-minute cut with various bits omitted, such as the visit to Stonehenge and snippets from the seance. It was released as Night of the Demon in the UK and as Curse of the Demon in the US. Having watched the longest version of the film available, the result is a significantly expanded version of the original story of Casting the Runes. It leaves out the church ending and the bed sequence, but the other 4 key moments I have previously highlighted are present and expanded upon. For example, the Magic Lantern show is shifted along within the sequencing quite a bit, from being the opening of the story to a section of character development for Carswell at about the 30-minute mark. The opening train sequence is swapped vehicle-wise, with an aeroplane, and the time allowed warning is taken from this and integrated with a library scene that also made its way into the Playhouse adaptation from 1979. One of the biggest changes to the story is that instead of it being a discussed but often shrouded threat, the supernatural entity that is ultimately a part of the featured spell conducted by Carswell is realised here as what is shown as a fire demon. It only appears visually, outside of copies of drawings presented to Holden at one point, in sequences at the beginning and at the end. An animatronic prop was used to display the entity. Reportedly, Ray Harryhausen was approached to do the work on the creature, but was already committed to the Seventh Voyage of Sinbad at the time. For me personally, the A Ghost Story for Christmas television films are very much often a gold standard as to how to do a screen piece of ghost story fiction. As such, it would be difficult for something to beat an installment if it were to tackle this type. The 1979 version of Casting the Runes is pretty much spiritually an episode of the show, as it has the same director, but for me this ultimately didn't do much for me and I found it to be pretty weak. So coming off that, writing about it and researching it in relevant subjects, entering into this film adaptation for what is my third time overall, proved to be quite an experience. Ultimately, this is a great supernatural horror film that delivers an expanded version of the source story very well. It manages to take four major components from the original and add bits and pieces that all very much fit together to create a solid production. Irish actor Niall McGuinness is a great actor to play Julian Carswell and manages to deliver an excellent portrayal of the character. The chemistry between them and Dana Andrews as John Holden is excellent, and the former's performance is great in the magic show sequence. Niall's character is very much shown as one of power, but also is someone that's always hiding something at the same time, which leads to a great line of dialogue that caps off a quality display of Carswell's beliefs and thoughts on the world of witchcraft and magic during the just mentioned scene.
But where does imagination end and reality begin? What is this twilight? This half-world of the mind that you profess to know so much about? How can we differentiate between the powers of darkness and the powers of the mind?
It is with this character also that much of the story here is constructed and built upon in regards to the original. We get the addition of their mother that allows for some great character dynamics and moments. One of the scenes added that wasn't prevalent in the text is a seance scene that is orchestrated by her that our protagonists John and Joanna attend. Ultimately, I'm not sure how much this scene adds to the film in terms of narrative context, but it did provide some good character stuff for our main duo, with it showing how much Joanna misses her father and what her beliefs are in regards to the subject matter of the production. During the scene, which is Dr. Holden's panel at the convention, we also get to see a member of the cult that got arrested and has since gone insane, which is very effective and has some excellent moments for our main character. It also displays the nature of Carswell's cult very well, in my opinion. The film was met with positive reviews at the time, although people were critical of the demon prop. It has continued to be liked by people, with the film having an 85% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. In 2013, Vic Pratt wrote a BFI article detailing their praise for the film, stating that it paved the way for later down the road horror classics The Wicker Man and Rosemary's Baby. Another fan of the film is the pop singer Kate Bush, who has said that it is one of her favourites. Their songs are known to have quite a gothic element and sound to them, which is likely because the artist was influenced a lot by horror films. Bush's third album, Never Forever, features a track on the second half entitled The Infant's Kiss, which was inspired by the Jack Clayton film The Innocents. Preceding this track by a couple years was the single Hammer Horror, This particular track, despite referencing the famous film company with the title, is actually written in inspiration from a viewing of a biographical film about silent horror film actor Lon Chaney. In 1985, the singer's fifth album, Hounds of Love, was released and is known for the opener Running Up That Hill, partially thanks to a popularity resurrection in recent years, courtesy of Netflix and Stranger Things. Somebody urgently speaking the line, "It's in the trees, it's coming," is what opens the album's following title track, this being directly sampled from the seance scene in Night of the Demon. The idea of sheets of paper with mythic writing being a faculty of power is also borrowed and used in the 1993 production The Line, the Cross and the Curve. This was a short film that basically acted as a music video for the entire album The Red Shoes by Kate, and in turn took inspiration from the classic musical film of the same name. As for myself, I would say that this was a really good expansion of the story and a pretty faithful telling of it. Faithful in regards as to how it presents the story, the treatment of the material used, and the addition of scenes that make sense in terms of what is present and shown within the world created in the source material. I would say that this is a much more engaging and rewarding watch than the ITV Playhouse version, with it adding a considerable depth to many of the subject matters present in the adventure. The exploration and discussion of witchcraft and the supernatural, for me, is really interesting and done well here, for adding to the main antagonist greatly. Although I will say that the demon prop is very effective at the start, there is a particular moment during the finale with it that clearly shows the limitations of it and ruins the effectiveness of the illusion pretty briefly. If you're a fan of the ghost stories of M.R. James and have checked out the majority of what there is in terms of adaptations, then I would highly recommend giving this a watch. Not to mention that it is generally a very solid supernatural horror film. This movie overall is commonly known as the movie adaptation of the author's stories, and at times it appears to be the only one. However, it would seem like that I have discovered another. Whereas I will not be giving it a full-length review and its own section, I would like to mention The Church from 1989. After an extremely successful run of making his own name in the history of Italian horror films of the giallo genre, with ones such as The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, Suspiria and Phenomena, Dario Argento co-wrote and co-produced this movie with Michael Soavi, a name I probably pronounced wrong, directing. Originally intended as a third installment to the Demon series, this follows a new librarian called Evan and another character called Lisa, who is restoring a painting depicting the cathedral. The two start to have paranormal visions after the discovery of a schematic layout of the building, with Evan finding and trying to claim a sack in a hidden crypt in turn, only to lose it and his hands to an unseen force. To me, this appears to have been an uncredited adaptation of, or at least heavily inspired by, The Treasure of Abbot Thomas.
I could look in the newspapers, the old newspapers, and find out what happened to the person that did that terrible thing to you. That's all I need from you, is your surname. So if I hold this out...
Guys?
Yeah?
Yeah. What do we call?
Something's in that room.
What are ghosts? Such a question will conjure many different ideas and images in the mind of whoever may hear it. Clanking chains, white sheets, an odd feeling of being watched whilst alone perhaps, an image of a person, the face of the dead, an energy stripped and taken at the time of death. Whatever you may think of them or believe, it is undeniable that grim mortality is a primary factor in the invention of these entities. This part of life was very much with Montague, something that haunted him. It is speculated and believed that he very much suffered internally, with him losing many to the swing of the scythe. The classic horror blog, M.R. James's disturbingly invasive, introspective ghost stories, A Deep Literary Analysis, Part 1, is an essay I have discovered and something that helped me build this closing section. It is here that it makes mention that the author felt a variety of guilt during the time of the First World War, and in turn analyses a warning to the curious as an allegorical piece about what survivors of the war suffered. Quote, "A crown rumoured to protect England from invasion during wartime." The article also summarises the exercise of writing his ghost stories as fictional therapy sessions for James. This closed a section of that topic, which was brought forward by a recounting of a friend of his saying that they had the personal purpose for this. Therefore, while venting his own moral anguish, he was able to reinvent the ghost story, whilst in turn becoming one of the most famous authors of that genre ever, with him taking them out of the confines of the Victorian era and rebuilding them to a modern day setting, abandoning many of the cliches that were prevalent previously in the long run. As well as this, the spectres are not typically what one would expect, at least for at the time that they are written in, with the pale figure appearance of one often being swapped to some fantastic phantasmagorical thing that often doesn't resemble anything human. Fittingly enough, he was influenced by authors that have seen adaptations alongside his, being Sheridan Le Furnau and Charles Dickens. For example, Mystery and Imagination saw 4 of his stories being adapted alongside Furnau's Carmilla, The Flying Dragon and Uncle Silas. The remembered but now largely destroyed series, the adaptations of James's stories were seen as the best, with the just mentioned Carmilla being a runner-up. I think it's safe to say that the power of these stories have long stayed with fans of the tradition and the genre, in turn further cementing the legacy of the author as one of the all-time greatest. Whether they are remembered as chilling black and white broadcasts from the second half of the 1960s, to unsettling Christmas time films in the 1970s, or masterful literary short stories, M.R. James will be remembered for years to come, and will always appear when ghost stories are discussed.